That morning, the entire wildlife reserve plunged into chaos when an aging mountain lion broke free from its enclosure and sent terrified visitors running for their lives. Yet, in the middle of the panic, one elderly woman didn't move an inch, almost as if she'd been waiting for him. No one understood why the predator released a soft, trembling call or why he walked past everyone else just to reach her. Only when security replayed the footage did the truth emerge. He was searching for the woman who had saved his life 26 years earlier, the one he never forgot, even as death crept close for them both. On a blistering summer morning at Red Canyon Wildlife Reserve, the kind of heat that makes the air wobble above the red dirt trails settled over the park. Families drifted beneath the shade of juniper trees, sipping iced drinks, pointing at the sandstone cliffs that framed the reserve like ancient guardians. Nothing felt dangerous. Nothing hinted at what was coming. And then, without warning, the loudspeakers shattered the quiet with a piercing alarm. Code Red, mountain lion loose. All visitors evacuate immediately. Panic erupted instantly. Mothers grabbed their children, spilling popcorn and water bottles across the walkway. A retired couple dropped their map and sprinted toward the exit. Even the birds burst from the treetops in a frantic scatter. The reserve security team, trained for emergencies but never truly ready for chaos, formed rushed barricades, shouting for people to move. Move now. Elena Cruz, a young trainee on her third week, nearly slipped on a fallen brochure as she ushered a trembling family toward the safety zone. But while everyone else ran, one person didn't move at all. Near the center of the courtyard, beside a sun-faded information board about wildfire prevention, an elderly woman stood perfectly still. She was thin, almost fragile, wrapped in a soft blue cardigan that fluttered gently in the hot wind. Her name was Nora Hartley. At 82, she looked like someone who should have been the first to panic, the first to be escorted away. But her eyes, clouded yet focused, were fixed on the tree line as if she had been waiting for something no one else could see. Elena! Rick Dawson, the head of security, shouted over the chaos. Get her out of there! I'm trying, Elena cried, lunging toward the woman. Ma'am, please, we need to move right now. But Nora didn't turn. She didn't even flinch, as if the alarm belonged to some other world, one she had already stepped away from long ago. A low rustle swept through the brush beyond the barrier. The crowd, though scattering in fear, sensed the shift. A collective shiver rippled through the space. And then he appeared. Coda, 18 years old, once powerful, now slow, but still commanding. His tawny coat shimmered under the sun, dusted with Red Canyon dirt. Scars lined his shoulder where old fights had shaped him, and his breathing came with a faint rasp, age tugging at the edges of every step he took. He slipped from the shadow of the pinyon pines, muscles flexing beneath his ribs, tail lowered but steady. Gasps broke the air. Oh my God, run! Somebody grab that kid. Don't look at him. Coda ignored the fleeing tourists. He didn't crouch. He didn't stalk. He didn't show the predatory intensity mountain lions are known for. Instead, he lifted his head and inhaled. A long, deliberate breath, as if tasting the wind for something precious and familiar. Rick raised his tranquilizer rifle. I need a clear shot. Everyone get low, now! But Coda's eyes didn't track Rick. They didn't track the screaming families. They locked onto the one unmoving figure in the courtyard, the fragile woman in blue, Nora. Elena froze when she noticed it, the way Coda's posture changed the moment he saw her. His ears angled forward, not pinned in aggression but lifted with startling attentiveness. His tail swept once along the dirt, not in warning, but in recognition. Ma'am, Elena whispered, voice cracking, why aren't you running? Nora finally blinked, her lips parted, trembling not with fear, but with something deeper, something unbearably tender. The mountain lion took a slow step forward. Rick shouted, Don't let him get closer. I'm taking the shot." "No," Elena cried without thinking. She didn't know why she said it, only that something about the scene felt wrong, off, not dangerous in the way she had been trained to expect. Coda stepped again, dust puffing at his paws. His chest rose with another thoughtful breath, nostrils flaring toward the woman as if pulling a memory from the heat-soaked air. The crowd had nearly emptied now, yet a few stragglers stood behind the barricades, phones up, live streaming what they believed might become breaking news in animal behavior, wildlife safety, or even environmental conservation. Topics trending constantly, especially during peak summer travel season. "Please," Elena begged, hands shaking as she reached for Nora's arm. "Let me help you." But Nora did something no one predicted. She let her cane fall. The wooden stick clattered against the concrete, echoing oddly in the near-deserted courtyard. She took a tiny, wavering step forward, eyes glistening in the unforgiving sunlight. And in a voice as soft as a breeze across canyon stone, she whispered a name. One no visitor, no guard, no handler could possibly have expected. "Coda, my sweet boy." Rick froze mid-aim. Elena's breath caught. Even the mountain lion seemed to falter, his paws planting more gently on the ground, shoulders dipping not in dominance, but in something closer to wonder. A sound slipped from his throat. A quiet, high-pitched chirp, an affectionate call mountain lions typically reserve only for their cubs or trusted companions. The courtyard, moments before drenched in chaos, shifted into a stunned silence. Coda was not hunting. Coda was remembering. And Nora? Nora was the only one who understood what that meant. Elena's fingers trembled as she reached for Nora's arm, but the elderly woman didn't seem to notice her at all. Her gaze was locked entirely on the mountain lion, now standing only a dozen yards away, the red canyon dust swirling faintly around his paws. Coda's eyes, old, amber, clouded but still piercing, held a depth that made Elena's breath hitch. She had been trained to recognize threat posture in predators, especially mountain lions, but nothing she saw in his stance matched what the textbooks warned about. No crouch, no tightening of the muscles, no predatory tunnel vision. What she saw instead looked disturbingly close to longing. "Nora," Elena whispered, voice dry from fear and heat. "Please, let's move. He's too close." But the older woman never blinked. She simply stared at Coda with an expression Elena couldn't place, part disbelief, part grief, part something so old and tender it felt almost sacred. The sun reflected off the woman's silver hair, and for a moment she looked like someone standing at the edge of time, not danger. Coda took another step. The murmurs from the few remaining visitors behind the barricades rose in startled waves. Phones lifted. Someone sobbed quietly. A ranger cursed under his breath, already imagining the headlines. Wildlife safety breach, dangerous animal escape, government oversight, public liability. The kind of headlines that dominated discussions around national parks and risk management. Rick tightened his grip on the tranquilizer rifle, jaw clenching hard enough that a muscle jumped near his ear. "Elena, pull her back," he commanded. "If she gets within striking distance, this becomes deadly." But Nora wasn't listening. She lifted her frail, wrinkled hand toward the enormous animal moving steadily through the courtyard's scattered shadows. Her hand shook, but not from fear. Elena could tell. It was something else, something deeper. Coda paused, ears swiveling like he was tuning himself to her heartbeat. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he made another chirping sound, soft, questioning, almost childlike. It didn't belong to a creature built for silence and power. It belonged to something younger, something remembered. "Oh, my Lord," Elena breathed. "He's talking to her?" Behind them, little Owen clung to the metal barrier, his small knuckles turning white. His mother tried pulling him away, but he refused, whispering with wide eyes, "He knows her, Mom. He really does." His innocence pierced the tension in a way no adult voice could have. Even Rick hesitated. Coda moved again, but slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might frighten the fragile woman who had dared to step toward him. Sunlight caught on the old injury along his shoulder, a long, pale scar that made him look both fierce and heartbreakingly vulnerable. His breath came out in soft bursts, revealing the faint rasp that had concerned the veterinary team for months. Age had dulled his strength, but not whatever force was pulling him toward this woman. "Nora, stop!" Rick warned, lowering his stance, rifle ready. "I'm serious. Don't get any closer." For the first time, Nora's eyes drifted, not to Rick, but to Elena standing beside her. Her voice, when she spoke, was little more than a wavering exhale. "He remembers." Those two words fell into the scorching air like stones breaking the surface of still water. Elena didn't know what they meant, but they made something in her chest twist. She swallowed hard, glancing between Nora and the lion. "How could he remember you?" she whispered. Nora didn't answer. Instead, she took another soft step toward the giant cat. Her sandals scraped against the concrete, and the sound startled Coda just enough for him to shift his weight. Rick reacted instantly, raising the rifle halfway. But Coda didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't tense for attack. He lowered his head, slowly, deliberately, almost reverently. A hush swept across the courtyard, a silence so complete even the cicadas seemed to pause their endless buzz. Coda's massive body softened, his tail brushing low along the ground. When he blinked, the movement was slow, almost a feline sign of trust. Nora's breath trembled. "Coda," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "My sweet boy. After all these years." Something fluttered deep inside Coda's chest, a nearly imperceptible rumble that vibrated through the hot summer air. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't dominance. It was something Elena had never heard, not in training videos, not in field reports, not in all the research articles she had skimmed about wildlife conservation and animal psychology. This was affection. "Coda," Nora repeated, her eyes filling with tears that caught the sunlight like tiny shards of glass. "You remember me? You really do." Rick slowly lowered the rifle an inch. Only an inch, but it was the first sign that even he, the man most responsible for the reserve's risk management and visitor safety protocols, understood something extraordinary was unfolding. Something that didn't fit into emergency plans, liability guidelines, or the kind of wildlife case studies people argued about in policy meetings or environmental impact reports. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "I don't know who you are to that animal, but I need you to—" He never finished, because right then Coda took another step, and gently, so gently it stunned every soul present, nudged his nose toward Nora's trembling hand. Her fingers brushed his muzzle. The contact was feather-light, fragile, impossible. Elena gasped. Owen cried out, "He's hugging her!" Rick froze like stone, rifle forgotten, and Nora let out a sound that shattered whatever composure she had been holding on to, a soft, broken sob that seemed to carry 26 years of buried memories across the canyon air. "Coda," she whispered, leaning forward just enough to steady her hand on his cheek. "My boy, you found me." Coda closed his eyes, and in that single moment, the entire courtyard, guards, stray visitors, even the desert wind, felt as if it bowed around them. Not predator and prey, not danger and victim. Just two old souls meeting again at the end of their long, separate journeys. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the desert wind felt suspended, as if Red Canyon itself were holding its breath while an aging mountain lion leaned into the trembling hand of a woman who should have been terrified, but wasn't. Elena stood frozen beside Nora, her heart thudding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She had seen videos of unusual animal behavior in documentaries and wildlife rescue stories, clips shared on social media about emotional bonds and the unpredictable depth of animal memory. But nothing prepared her for seeing something like this unfold only a few feet away. Rick finally lowered the tranquilizer rifle, but not all the way. His instincts screamed at him to stay on alert, yet some deeper part of him, some quiet human part, knew they were no longer dealing with a standard threat. Coda's posture was too soft, too familiar, too intentional. "Elena," Rick murmured without looking away from the lion, "back up slowly. Keep your hands where he can see them." But Elena didn't move. She couldn't. What she was witnessing felt less like a wildlife emergency and more like a reunion years in the making. Nora, still touching Coda's muzzle, whispered something that sounded like a prayer more than a greeting. The old cat responded with another soft chirp, pressing his head gently into her palm. Behind the barricades, a few visitors who had refused to flee lifted their phones. One murmured, "This is like something out of a nature documentary. Or a miracle?" Another whispered that they'd seen videos of emotional pet reunions on YouTube, especially in channels about animal rescue or end-of-life care, but never anything involving a wild predator. Words like unbelievable, wildlife conservation, and animal behavior research floated through the hushed air. In the control center above the courtyard, staff scrambled around glowing screens. Red alerts still pulsed across monitors. A technician rewound and slowed the security footage from earlier that morning. Dr. Harper Lynn, the reserve's lead wildlife specialist, leaned over the console, her eyes narrowing as she studied the clips frame by frame. "Pause it there," she said sharply. They froze the footage at the moment Coda lifted his head inside his enclosure. His ears twitched, nostrils flaring toward the entrance gates long before the alarm was triggered. He had been resting, limbs tucked under him, clearly exhausted, when something in the air changed. He rose slowly, sniffing again, body tense but not hostile. The technician resumed playback. Coda began pacing, his movements growing increasingly agitated. He pushed at the metal gate once, twice. On the third shove, the faulty lower latch, missed by the overnight staff member, rattled loose just enough for a gap to form. Harper sucked in a breath. He wasn't trying to escape randomly. He smelled something. Another ranger frowned. "Like what? Fresh meat? A territorial threat?" Harper shook her head. "This isn't defensive behavior. Look at his tail. It never lashes. This is recognition. Scent recognition. Something familiar to him after a long time." The technician checked the timestamp. This was at 8:07 a.m. Harper turned toward the logbook. "And what time did the elderly woman enter the reserve?" 8:06, the technician said, after scrolling. The room fell silent, save for the low hum of equipment. "Are you telling me," a ranger whispered, "that he smelled her from all the way across the park?" Harper didn't answer immediately. She knew mountain lions possessed extraordinary sensory abilities, especially in tracking scent across rugged terrain. But this wasn't just a scent trail. This was a trigger. Something emotional. Something imprinted so deeply it pulled a creature out of confinement and across an entire reserve. "Replay the rest," she said softly. Footage showed Coda slipping through the imperfectly latched gate. Instead of bolting into the open, a typical escape response, he stopped, lifted his head again, then walked, not randomly, not searching, but in a straight, determined line toward the main visitor courtyard, toward Nora. Harper pressed her fingertips to her lips. "This isn't about territory, or hunger, or panic. This is a search." Back in the courtyard, Rick finally stepped closer to Elena, his voice low. "What exactly is going on here?" Elena swallowed hard. She she said he remembers. Rick didn't believe in miracles. He believed in procedures, tranquilizers, incident reports, and risk assessment. But when he looked at Nora and Coda, standing so close together, it looked as though they belonged to the same fragile, unspoken world. His certainty faltered. Nora rested her palm fully against the side of Coda's face. The lion closed his eyes and leaned in, his breath warming her wrist. She whispered, barely audible, "I'm here now, sweetheart. I'm here." The sincerity in her voice stirred something in the small crowd behind the barricades. Even Owen, still gripping the fence beside his mother, leaned forward with wide, damp eyes. "Mom," he whispered shakily. He knows her. He really, really knows her. Nora looked impossibly small compared to the massive animal at her side. Yet it was Coda who seemed the more fragile of the two, his ribs rising sharply with every breath, his legs trembling from strain. Age had whittled him down, and now, up close, the rasp in his breathing was unmistakable. Elena finally stepped back, her hands trembling with adrenaline. "Rick, what do we do? What do we actually do?" Rick didn't answer right away. He couldn't. Leadership demanded decisiveness, yet everything about this moment defied protocol. Any tranquilizer shot now would risk hitting Nora. Any sudden move might spook Coda, and any attempt to separate them could lead to disaster. Instead, he lowered the rifle another inch, which for him was the closest thing to an admission of awe. Harper arrived breathlessly seconds later, having sprinted from the control center. She halted at the sight before her, scientific logic warring with human emotion. "Oh my God," she murmured. "This shouldn't be possible." Rick gestured toward the lion. "Tell me you've seen anything like this." Harper shook her head slowly. "Not with mountain lions. Not with a bond this deep, this persistent." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Elena. If he's recognizing her scent after decades, Nora isn't just anyone from his past. "Then who is she?" Elena breathed. Harper exhaled, watching as Coda gently brushed his cheek along Nora's sleeve like a house cat seeking comfort. "I think," Harper said softly, "she's the beginning of his story." Coda lifted his head and pressed it gently against Nora's shoulder, releasing another soft rumbling sound. The courtyard, the alarms, the fear, they all seemed to fade into the blistering canyon heat. Nora closed her eyes, overwhelmed. "Oh, Coda, after all these years, how could you still know me?" Coda's only answer was a trembling exhale that carried 26 years of waiting. The moment Coda leaned his weight gently against Nora's shoulder, something inside her seemed to give way, like a door she had kept locked for decades finally creaked open. Her hand trembled against his fur, but not from fear. It was memory, thick, heavy, and rising like heat from the canyon floor. Elena watched her eyes shift, not toward the present, but somewhere far beyond it, as if the old woman were staring straight into a different summer altogether. "Nora," Harper whispered carefully, "can you tell us how he knows you?" But Nora didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted down Coda's scarred cheek, then to the faint limp in his back leg. Old pain she recognized the way someone recognizes their own handwriting. The world around her blurred. The alarms, the barricades, the gasping visitors, even the digital hum of someone live-streaming behind a bush. All of it dissolved into the scorching quiet of a wildfire season she had tried so hard to forget. Many years earlier, long before Red Canyon had visitor centers and wildlife educational programs, Nora Hartley had lived in a small adobe home just outside Sedona. Back then, summers were brutal, the kind that cracked the earth and set the sky dancing with waves of heat. She had worked in environmental conservation, helping with endangered species rescue efforts, long before such work became a topic debated in national policy or highlighted in outdoor safety campaigns. But one night, one terrible summer night, Her life had changed forever. A wildfire had torn across the canyon floors faster than anyone expected. Nora remembered standing on her porch, the sky glowing orange as embers rode the wind like burning snowflakes. Fire crews shouted, trucks roared down the dirt road, and helicopters thundered overhead. She was gathering her evacuation things when she heard it, a thin, pained cry carried on the smoky wind. At first she thought it was a fawn or maybe someone's injured dog. But the sound came again, so faint she almost missed it. Against every sensible instinct, she followed it into the choking haze behind her property, calling out softly, shielding her face from the heat. And there, curled beneath a scorched juniper bush, was a tiny ball of trembling fur. A mountain lion cub, no bigger than a house cat. One leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his ribs showing through singed fur. His mother lay nearby, collapsed from smoke and injuries she would never recover from. The cub let out a thin whimper when Nora approached, too weak to run, too frightened to understand anything except pain. "I've got you," Nora had whispered then, the same way she whispered to the trembling creature standing beside her now. "You're not alone." She brought him inside despite every rule she had ever learned. She soaked a towel in cool water, wrapped his fragile body, and fed him warm formula through a dropper every 2 hours. She slept on the floor beside him, waking at each whimper, humming old folk songs as if he were a child who needed soothing. His injured leg healed slowly, but he followed her everywhere, trailing her through the kitchen, nosing at her ankles, curling against her chest at night with soft, rasping breaths. When summer ended, he was strong enough to explore the backyard, pouncing clumsily on grasshoppers, rolling in the red dirt until he looked like a dusty little ghost. She named him Coda, and Coda loved her with the fierce, unfiltered devotion only orphaned creatures seem to possess. He would press his head against her ribs when thunderstorms shook the sky. He'd chirp for her when he woke from naps. He memorized her scent so deeply that nothing, not time, not age, not distance, could erase it. But Nora knew what she also didn't want to know. Mountain lions don't stay small. By the next summer, Coda's paws were too large, his legs too strong, his instincts too wild. And one day, a ranger knocked on her door. Regulations required that Coda be transferred to a licensed rehabilitation center, Red Canyon Wildlife Reserve. She begged for more time. She filled out appeals. She argued that Coda wasn't ready. But the law didn't bend. The day they came for him, Coda cried in a way she had never heard before, a desperate, panicked cry that clawed straight through her heart. He pawed at the crate, eyes wide, begging her not to let them take him. Nora pressed her hands to the metal bars and repeated the only lie she had ever told him. "I'll come visit, I promise." But life unraveled. Her husband fell ill. Bills mounted. Her own health began to crack, slow but relentless. Weeks turned into months, months into years, and each year guilt sat heavier on her chest. At some point she convinced herself he had forgotten her, that forgetting was kinder, but Coda had never forgotten. Back in the courtyard, the present slammed gently back into her awareness as Coda nudged her hand again, the same way he used to nudge her knee when he wanted reassurance on stormy nights. Nora's breath shuddered. Rick stared at her as if hearing a ghost story come alive. "Nora," Harper said quietly, "is this true? You raised him?" Nora wiped at her eyes, her voice thin but steady. "He was just a baby when I found him. Lost, hurt, alone. I saved him, and then he saved me. And I never said goodbye the way I should have." Coda pressed his forehead against her hip. The crowd behind the fence went silent. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. "He remembers my scent," Nora whispered, her fingers sliding into the fur between his ears. After all these years, he remembered his mother. Harper covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Rick lowered his rifle completely for the first time since the alarm had sounded. Nothing about this scene belonged to standard wildlife behavior or risk management or any emergency plan designed around public safety and animal control. This belonged to something older, something deeper, an unbroken line stretching across decades, held together by memory and love. And for the first time, Red Canyon understood that this wasn't just a dangerous moment. It was a homecoming. The courtyard slowly shifted from chaos to a trembling quiet, as if the entire reserve sensed the fragile thread holding the moment together. Coda remained pressed against Nora's side, his breathing uneven, his ribs lifting with visible effort. Harper watched him closely, years of medical training flickering behind her eyes. She stepped nearer, not too close, not enough to threaten the mountain lion, but enough to see the way his flanks trembled with every breath he took. "Rick," Harper murmured under her breath. "He's not just old. Something is wrong." Rick glanced at her sharply, then looked back at the lion leaning heavily against Nora. The rasp in Coda's breathing had become more pronounced, catching in his throat like a stalled engine. For the first time since this began, Rick's fear wasn't for the visitors or even for Nora. It was for the animal himself. "Coda," Nora whispered softly, running her hand along his jawline. "You've been hurting, haven't you?" The lion responded by pressing closer, the way he once did as a cub when thunderstorms rattled her windows. He tried to lower himself more comfortably onto the ground, but his legs wobbled beneath him, and he let out a low groan that sounded far too close to pain. Elena felt her chest tighten. "Is he sick?" Harper nodded grimly. "He's been slowing down for months, eating less, moving less. We suspected renal decline, age-related kidney failure. It's common in older mountain lions, especially those raised in captivity." Her voice softened. "But I didn't think he was this far along." Nora's hand stilled in Coda's fur. Pain washed across her face, not fear for herself, but fear for him. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you shouldn't have had to come all this way. Not like this." Coda nudged her weakly, as if disagreeing. He had spent his entire life waiting to find her again, and he wasn't about to let pain change that. Behind them, the last handful of visitors had clustered near the barriers. Owen, still gripping the metal rail, stared with watery eyes at the lion, who seemed too tired to stand tall anymore. "Mom," he whispered, tugging her sleeve. "He's not going to hurt her. He's scared. And tired." His mother looked like she wanted to pull him away, to shield him from the sight, but she didn't. Something about the scene demanded reverence, a moment so raw that even a child felt the weight of it. Rick exhaled slowly, lowering the tranquilizer rifle completely now. "We need to move them," he said quietly. "Nora can't stay out here in this heat, and that cat, he's barely standing." Harper nodded. "If we're going to treat him at all, he needs to get to the medical bay. But—" she hesitated, glancing at Nora. "He won't let us separate them." Nora looked up, her face pale beneath the brutal summer sun. "Please," she said softly, "don't take him from me again." Elena stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Nora's arm. "We won't," she promised. "Not unless you tell us to." Just then, an older ranger jogged into the courtyard, Tom Briggs, a man who'd worked at Red Canyon since the days before public tours and educational brochures about wildlife conservation. His face went slack the moment he saw Nora with the lion. "I'll be damned," he whispered, removing his hat. "Coda? That's really you?" Harper turned to him. "Tom, you knew him when he first arrived here?" "Knew him?" Tom let out a hollow laugh. "I was the one who fed him his first solid meal, back when he was just a scrawny thing, crying every time someone walked away." He looked at the big cat now leaning his full weight on Nora. Stopped letting anyone touch him when he hit adolescence, especially men. No one's been this close to him in years. The significance of that statement settled over everyone like dust. Nora stroked Coda's cheek again, and the old lion's eyes fluttered shut with a shuddering breath. Harper's concern sharpened. "We don't have long," she whispered to Rick. "If his kidneys are failing, the heat will push him past the edge." Rick rubbed a hand over his face, torn between duty and the sight in front of him. "So what's the plan? We can't sedate him. It could kill him. We can't drag them apart. And we can't leave them here." Harper took a slow breath. "Then we escort them together. Gently. No sudden movements." Rick nodded and gave the order. Staff members formed a loose half-circle around Nora and Coda, not to trap them, but to guide them. Harper knelt a few feet away and extended her hand, palm open. "Nora," she said gently, "we're going to take you both to the medical bay, all right? A cooler room, quieter. We can give him fluids, check his levels, and you'll stay with him the whole time." Nora looked down at the lion, her voice trembling. "Will it help him?" Harper hesitated, a pause that said more than any answer could, but managed. "It might make him more comfortable." Comfort, not cure. Nora understood. She nodded and whispered, "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go where it's cool." Coda lifted his head, his breath rattling, and slowly, painfully, rose to his feet. His body shook under the effort, but when Nora placed her hand on his shoulder, he steadied. They took one step, then another. Rick and Harper moved with them, forming a quiet procession across the courtyard. Visitors watched in stunned silence. Some wept openly, others filmed, knowing they weren't capturing a spectacle, but a moment of profound connection, something deeper than any wildlife documentary or medical article about animal cognition could ever express. As they reached the shaded walkway leading toward the medical wing, Owen tugged his mother's hand again. "Mom," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "They're both sick, aren't they?" His mother didn't answer, but Nora did. She turned her head just enough for her voice to carry back to him. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're both running out of time." Coda let out a soft, aching rumble at her words, almost as if he understood every syllable. And together, an old woman and a tired mountain lion, they walked into the dim hallway of the medical bay, two fading hearts beating in unsteady harmony. The medical bay at Red Canyon was dim and cool, a welcome contrast to the blistering courtyard where everything had begun. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, their steps soft against the smooth concrete floors. No one wanted to break the fragile calm that had settled over the room. Nora sat on a cushioned bench near the far wall, her hands trembling slightly as they rested atop Coda's massive head. The old mountain lion lay beside her, his breath shallow but steady for the moment, his tail curled around her ankles like it once did when he was a cub hiding from thunder. Harper adjusted an IV line nearby, watching the slow drip of fluids entering Coda's veins. "This should help a little," she murmured. "Ease the strain on his kidneys." She didn't promise more than that. Nora didn't ask for more than that. Both women understood what was coming, though neither dared to say it aloud. Elena stood near the doorway, her eyes red from tears. She wasn't sure she fully understood. The scene felt too intimate, too sacred, something she had no right to witness, but couldn't bring herself to walk away from. Tom Briggs lingered behind her, hat in hand, staring with a mix of awe and heartbreak. Rick watched from the corner of the room, arms crossed but no longer with the defensive posture he wore in emergencies. His stern expression had softened into something quieter. Respect, maybe even reverence. He had seen thousands of incidents in his years managing wildlife safety, insurance claims, environmental hazards, accident reports, but nothing like this. Nothing that touched the deeper parts of a person's heart, the parts that made life and loss feel intertwined. Coda shifted, letting out a soft groan. Nora immediately leaned toward him, smoothing a hand along the ridge of his spine. "Easy now, sweetheart. I'm right here." The lion's ears flicked in response, and he edged closer, resting his chin against her thigh. Nora winced slightly as his weight pressed into her frail legs, but she didn't move away. Owen appeared in the doorway then, clutching a piece of paper. His mother tried urging him back, but Harper gestured gently for him to come in. The boy stepped forward with slow, careful steps, his eyes locked on Coda's tired form. "Miss Nora," he whispered, holding the paper out with both hands. I drew something for you." Nora smiled warmly. "For me? Let's see what you made, darling." Owen passed the drawing to her. On the page, done in bright crayons, was a picture of an old woman sitting beside a mountain lion under a sun blazing over Red Canyon walls. The figures were simple but unmistakable. Two beings leaning in toward each other, sharing the same patch of ground, the same moment in time. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed, her voice cracking. "Thank you. This is exactly how I want to remember today." Coda let out a low rumble, as if agreeing. Owen stepped closer and placed a small hand against the lion's back. When Coda didn't react with fear or tension, the boy's eyes widened with amazement. "He's warm," Owen whispered, "and soft." "Soft in the ways that matter," Nora said gently. "Even the wild ones carry love." The room fell quiet again, filled only with the rhythmic drip of the IV and the distant hum of cooling vents. Coda's breaths grew slower, heavier. Harper checked his vitals, her brow furrowing, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Nora could feel the truth in the lion's trembling muscles, in the way his heartbeat fluttered beneath his ribs. "Nora," Harper said softly, kneeling by her side, "you should lie back. Save your strength." But Nora shook her head. "No, not yet. I've spent half my life wishing I could see him again. I won't waste a minute sitting apart from him now." Harper hesitated, then nodded. She stood and signaled to Elena and Tom. Together they rearranged cushions and laid a soft blanket on the floor. Nora reached for her cane, but Elena gently held her arm. "Let us help you," Elena said. With slow, careful movements, they guided Nora to the floor beside Coda. The old lion lifted his head with effort, pulling himself closer until his body curved protectively around hers. Nora settled against his warm side, her hand finding its familiar place on his cheek. "There you are," she whispered, her breath trembling. "Just like before." Coda exhaled, a soft, shaky sound that vibrated against her ribs. His eyes closed, and his breathing deepened for a moment, as if being beside her gave him a temporary strength no medicine could provide. Nora rested her head against his mane, letting her fingers trace the patterns of his fur. "I should have come sooner," she murmured. "I should have kept my promise." Coda nudged her gently, and she smiled through her tears. "You waited," she said softly. "All these years, you waited for me." Harper wiped her eyes. Tom bowed his head. Even Rick looked away, blinking against the sting behind his eyes. There was no fear left in the room now, only a quiet acceptance, the kind that settles between two beings who have loved deeply and lost much. Nora's breaths had grown thinner, spaced further apart. She spoke in a faint whisper. "Coda, sweetheart, thank you for finding me." Coda opened his eyes once more, lifting his head just enough to touch his nose to her cheek. A single warm breath brushed against her skin. Then his head lowered again, settling gently beside hers. Nora exhaled a final fragile sigh. Her chest rose once, twice, and then stilled. Coda sensed the change immediately. A low, broken rumble escaped him, a sound so full of grief it seemed to echo off the walls. He pressed his head against her shoulder, refusing to move, refusing to let go. Harper's hand flew to her mouth. Elena turned away, tears streaming freely. Owen sobbed into his mother's arms. Even Rick bowed his head, defeated by the weight of the moment. For a long time, Coda didn't move, not until the early hours of the morning when the first pale streaks of dawn touched the canyon rim. At last, with great effort, he lifted his head from Nora's still form. He looked at her one final time, then lay down again with a weary sigh that carried every year of waiting, every moment of love. 5 weeks later, Coda slipped away in his sleep. Some said it was kidney failure, others whispered it was a broken heart. But everyone who had witnessed their reunion knew the truth lay somewhere tender between the two, as natural and mysterious as the bond that had brought them together again. Red Canyon built a memorial near the entrance, a bronze sculpture of a mountain lion resting his head gently against the hand of an elderly woman. Visitors often paused there, touched by a story they hadn't lived but somehow still felt. And on the plaque beneath the statue were 4 simple words: "Love remembers everything." If you'd like a full story revision, polishing, or expansion into a complete long-form script, just let me know.